Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the stream. So good to see everyone in the chat tonight. Another exciting evening here tonight from home, doing these home streams while things are still not back to normal, but hopefully soon. And very excited again tonight to have just an incredible guest with us. It is a true honor to be able to talk to this official Disney legend after hearing this person's stories from his book and also watching some of his other interviews that he's done. Really just a huge part of Disney history. And specifically Disney parks history, which again is what this channel is all about, Walt Disney World and the parks. And just so excited to have the opportunity tonight to spend some time and hear these stories. And I'm so happy that you guys are here to hear them with me. So without further ado, please welcome our very, very special guest tonight, Disney legend Tom Nabbe. Welcome to the stream, Tom.
Oh, well, thanks very much, Cory.
It's so awesome to have you here with us tonight. I thank you once again for doing this, for being so generous with your time to spend the night here with us and share your story with everyone. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of my history, and it parallels Disneyland and Walt Disney World. So
absolutely,
that's how it gets tied together.
Well, guys, if you're here tonight, it's your first time, Tom may be new to you. You might not know Tom's story. You're going to learn it tonight, and you can learn a lot more about it in Tom's book. And we're going to post the link to his book in the chat throughout the stream. And there's two ways to buy it. You can go over to his website, and you can buy it and get it personalized to you, autographed by Tom. Or you can go buy it over on Amazon if you want to get the Kindle version. You can go get it over there too. So that is over on tomnabbe.com is where you can get the book, or again over on Amazon, and you won't be disappointed. A great book, a lot of history there, and we'll continue. It'll fill in some of the gaps too from tonight. It goes deeper into some of those stories. So also, after we're done kind of with this interview and discussion here, we'll take questions. So throughout the stream, if you have any questions, please just post them in the chat, and we'll be taking those and kind of filing them over. And after the stream, we'll go over and try and answer some of those questions. So please feel free to put those in the chat throughout the stream. And we actually have a screen here that goes along with this. There we go. We've got it. We've got it up now. So this is Tom has a PowerPoint that he's prepared that kind of goes along with this, and I'm really excited because he just has some really historic photos that tie back into this story. So without further ado, guys, Tom, I'm going to hand it off to you and let you just start and tell us how this all started for you.
Super. This is a PowerPoint presentation that I've put together because I get requests like this to do presentations, and it was sort of nice to be able to tie it in with some slides and that. So we'll start out as I was born in Santa Barbara, California, and lived there for a few years, and then we moved from Santa Barbara to Los Angeles. And when I got to Los Angeles and I wanted to get a paper route, and I needed a bicycle. And my stepfather wasn't going to cough up the money for a bicycle. I needed to go to work and earn the money to get a bicycle. So I was able to go up to the Coliseum during football season and sell newspapers. Rode the bus up, rode the bus back. And I earned enough money in order to buy a bicycle, and I got a paper route. We lived downtown Los Angeles. Slauson and Alameda were the two major cross streets. And I think we can go to probably the next slide if you want to. My mother was a little bit of a starlet wannabe, and she used to haul us up to the premiere openings up in Hollywood all the time. and she's that lady that's standing behind the barricade with the autograph book, wanting to get the celebrities' autographs and that. And she got very enamored with Walt. If you go to the next slide, and Disneyland was on Wednesday evenings, and actually it was an hour commercial for Disneyland.
Wow.
And Walt would talk all about what was going on, and my mother decided to go down to Anaheim and look around, and she was able to find a house in Anaheim on a GI Bill. My stepfather had been in the Navy, and so he was eligible, and so we ended up getting a house that was 7/10 of a mile away from Disneyland.
Wow.
And when we got to Anaheim, I wanted a newspaper route, and Anaheim was considered rural. So in order to get a paper route in Anaheim, you had to be 16 and have a driver's license. Well, I was only 12, so I wasn't going to get a driver's license. But I could get a Sunday paper route. I built up a clientele of about 20 people that I would deliver papers to in the neighborhood on Sunday mornings. And back then, the Sunday paper was a good sized newspaper. It weighed a pound and a half, maybe 2 pounds, with all the sections in it. And I had a little card on the back of my bicycle, and my paper manager would give me whatever extra papers he would have, and he'd drop them off. And so on Sunday morning, I delivered to my normal customers, and then I'd ride over on Harbor Boulevard over the overpass, if you go to the next slide, to the Harbor Gate. And this is the Harbor Gate. I don't think there was ever a gate on the Harbor Gate until after 9/11. In turn, if you look through there, you got the Skyway, and then below the Skyway is the garage that they worked on the Autopia cars. And I would get over in the morning and try to get there just about the time that the third shift folks were leaving to go home. They were working 3 shifts, trying to get Disneyland open and ready to go. So I didn't have any problem selling off my newspapers to the people that were getting off work in the morning on Sunday mornings. And I met a gentleman by the name of Ray Ahmet, and Joe and Ray had the concession on Main Street called Castle News, and they were going to have a newspaper called the Disneyland News. It was sort of a chronicle after the turn of the century, 1800s. Newspaper, and in there it told all about Disneyland, and then future attractions at Disneyland, and the original people that worked at Disneyland, only the maintenance people, administration, and the people that operate the rides and attractions actually work for Disneyland. Okay, all the rest, all the food operations and all the merchandise operations were lessees. At Walt Disney World, we call them participants, but in California, they were called lessees. And Joe and Ray were one of those lessees. And besides the Castle News concession on Main Street, they had strollers and wheelchairs, had printing press in there where they could put your name in the headline of the newspaper, or could put you on a wanted poster. That was one of the things they had. And then if you look at the front of any of the Disney theme parks, the merchandise location on the left-hand side is called a newsstand.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 1955, that was an actual newsstand. Okay. So in turn, getting probably a little ahead of the story here.
Sorry.
One of the things that we used to do is right up. They had just finished building the overpass on Harbor Boulevard, over Manchester, which is now the Santa Ana Freeway, which I think now is the 405.
It's either the 5,
Yeah,
maybe. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, and so we could get up to the top of the overpass, and you'd look down in, and you'd be looking into the back of Main Street. You could see a little bit of Fantasyland, quite a bit of Tomorrowland, uh,
Wow.
and it was sort of neat. And then they built the berm. When they built the berm, then that restricted the view from the overpass, and then they planted shrubbery on the berm, and that restricted the view a little bit more. Uh, I remember one day that we chased the TWA rocket
Oh,
uh,
wow.
down the Harbor Boulevard. It was on a flatbed truck, and we chased it down Harbor Boulevard, and it pulled up to the Harbor Gate here. And so we turned around and went back up to the top of the overpass because we knew that they were going to stand that rocket up in Tomorrowland.
Wow. And
Yeah,
that, I mean, yeah, at that point you were 12 years old, right? At that
yeah,
point. So
yeah.
at 12 years old, like what was the buzz like there? Because I mean, you're living in the neighborhood where Disneyland's getting built. So I mean, was it just like everything everyone talked about is that there's this awesome theme park that's designed by Walt Disney about to open like right down the street from my house? That had to be incredible.
Well, you got to look back. Orange County actually had orange trees
Yeah.
in Anaheim. There were orange groves. When I'd walk to school, I walked by 2, 3 orange groves on the way to school, and we lived off of Citron Avenue. So and Harbor Boulevard was a 3-lane road back then, a center lane for left-hand turns, and it
Hmm.
went all the way to Newport Beach. Things started changing
Oh yeah.
drastically. Back in the beginning, it was a very rural area,
Hmm.
and uh, schools. Uh, Anaheim High was the only high school in the area. Now I think now they got 14, 15 high schools now in
Yeah.
the Anaheim school districts. So in turn, on July 17th, the press opening. Uh, Guess who's there with their autograph book? And we're there, and I'm back over here at Harbor Gate because I wanted to see those Autopia cars, and there's a
Hmm.
little opening behind that guard shack that you could see into the service garage. But boy, I wanted to drive those Autopia cars. Well, my mother was over getting autographs, and Danny Thomas. We go to the next slide. Danny Thomas, who is a very very popular TV uh, actor, and a lot of people got to be more my age to know who Danny Thomas is. But in turn, if you know St. Jude's Hospital, Children's Hospital, Danny Thomas is a founder of that.
Hmm.
So and his daughter Marlo has pretty much kept that going for years and years. And so Danny Thomas came out. My mother asked him for his autograph, and he very cordially gave that to her. And he sort of leaned forward and he says, "Well, have you been into the park?" And she said, "No." And he says, "Well, I got a couple extra tickets. Would you like them?"
Wow.
And so, in turn, it comes right down to the nitty gritty that we were the guests of Danny Thomas for the press opening. And this is the ticket that he gave us.
That is
If you look at
unbelievable.
the ticket now, and there are no numbers other than a time and the date on
Hmm.
the ticket. If you turn it over on the back side, there's just a map on how to get to Disneyland. Uh,
Wow.
so if anybody asks that, Tom Nabbe has ticket number 1. Uh, but in turn, the tickets are in the archives. The time on the ticket in the archives is 2:30
Ah,
p.m.
got it.
it says 5:30 p.m. So,
hey, I'll take it. 5:30. That's close enough.
and then across the bottom, I've added my service pins for Disneyland. The silver pin there is 1 year, and then the bronze pin on the far right is 5 years, and then the 10-year pin in the middle, and then I have a 15-year pin that I use as a lapel pin because I like it very much. It's gold with the blue stone and
Oh, yeah.
so that's sort of neat. Okay, so in turn, we get into the park, and guess we're back up a little bit. Uh, so guess where I'm headed? I'm headed to Tomorrowland, and agreed with my mother that we would meet in front of the castle. And so I headed over because I wanted to drive with them Autopia cars. And when I got there, they were all broke
Oh,
Yeah.
all that waiting.
So came back and got together with my mother, and we did ride the carousel in Fantasyland. And I'll tell you, in my 50 years of working for Disney, that's probably the trashiest I've ever seen a Disney park in my entire life. One of the things that I've sort of added in here is the what the characters look like in 1955. You can go to the next slide. Okay, they're actually pretty scary.
They are.
That's Mickey and Donald. I think a lot of the costumes that were there on opening day were from Ice Capade. That they had those costumes. This next slide I really love, and I'd love to say that I'm the kid in the slide, but I'm not.
Oh, man.
This is the three little pigs.
It's absolutely frightening.
So, and you can go through and look at the evolution of the characters through the years, and
Yeah.
the various costumes and heads, and how Mickey was tall and then Mickey was short, and then Mickey had a big head and little legs, and then finally they got Paul Castle in there, and he looked sort of like Mickey at the right time. I think next slide's Walt picking up trash. Oh no, that's the Autopia car. Um, in 1955, one of the major TV series was California Highway Patrol,
Yeah.
and Broderick Crawford was the narrator for the show, and they had about six cars made up like the California Highway Patrol cars.
That's
Had
cool.
red lights and sirens, and what we would do, all the newspaper boys in the morning, we would get in early because we'd sell our newspapers. If you sold 100 newspapers outside, then they'd let you inside, and you could continue to sell newspapers during the day. Well, there's that little interim that you'd get inside, but the guests wouldn't come in for a little bit. So we'd run over to Tomorrowland, and we'd help stage the Autopia cars for when the guests came in. And every once in a while, you got to drive one of the police cars. And the police car didn't have a governor on it. All the rest of the other cars were governed down to around 10 miles an hour. The police car would click along. And if you look at this picture, there's no track in the middle of this. So those of us
go-karts at that point.
Through the years, we used to call it Blood Alley. You were definitely going to get tagged somewhere along the line. And there's a couple of places on that track where you could pass.
Wow.
And then in turn they would pass, but then it would close in, and then they'd get wedged, and you had to go clear the cars out of the way.
That's unbelievable.
Okay, well, that's Walt picking up trash, and like I say, I think what he saw at opening is when cleanliness went right up to the top of the list. So it was courtesy, capacity, safety, and cleanliness were all the key elements that the folks in operations focused on. Next slide. Okay, so this is what I did as a newspaper boy and selling the Disneyland news. Well, and it said that the newsstand out front was actually a newsstand, and every day Joe or Ray would get a copy of every paper that they had. They'd pull out the ads and stuff, but the meat, the editorial sections, and that, and I would carry those up and put them on Eddie Meck's desk. Eddie Meck was the manager of publicity, and his office was in the city hall. And so I got to know a lot of the people in publicity. And Eddie used to say, "Okay, we got this shot. Go find that redheaded kid." That Tom Nabbe kid, that all-American image. If you look at me today, my hair back at that time was fire red, and I had freckles, and I wore a straw hat and cut off Levi's and a gingham shirt, and I wore the straw hat because I sunburned real easy. So this is one of those scenarios. Is that Milton Berle and Jerry Lewis were visiting the park, and it was in August of 1955, and so they did up a headline in the newspaper, and it basically says Disneyland welcomes Milty and Jerry to it, and I had the opportunity of getting a photo location with them. There's a few times they filmed the Mickey Mouse Club newsreels at the park, and I was in a couple of those newsreels too. Along the line, I remember the one where we were out in the jungle with Mattel rifles and hunting lions and bears and that type of thing. So as I'm selling newspapers, somebody told me, and I'm think it was somebody that worked in Pendleton, that had the shop in Frontierland, told me that Walt was going to build Tom Sawyer's Island on the island in the center of the rivers of America. And that you look just like Walt, you look just like Tom Sawyer used to ask Walt for a job. And I thought that was one hell of an idea. And Walt was in the park quite frequently back at that time. Where he'd drive down on Friday afternoons, and he had the apartment there in the fire station, and so he would stay the weekend and then drive back up to the studio on Burbank on Sunday, so he could be back at work on Monday morning. Okay, so I tracked Walt down, told him I looked just like Tom Sawyer, and I heard he was building Tom Sawyer's Island, and he should hire me. But what he did say is he said he'd think about it. He didn't say no, because if he said no, we wouldn't be here talking.
Exactly.
So he said he'd think about it. So almost for the next year, anytime I had the opportunity to see Walt, I'd ask him if he was still thinking about hiring me to be Tom Sawyer. I think when you really look at it, I think Walt originally intended the island to be like Snow White's Scary Adventure. When you went through Snow White's Scary Adventure, you were Snow White.
Sure.
Okay, so if you went to Tom Sawyer's Island, then in turn you were going to be Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn or Becky Thatcher or whatever character that you wanted to be. So I think I really talked him into having a character on the island, and so one of the things that they had is fishing, and they had roped off an area, fenced in area that they stocked with bluegill, catfish, and sun perch, uh, and had 25 poles on each of the fishing piers. You know, what did Tom Sawyer do? Well, Tom Sawyer posed for a whole lot of pictures, and I would respond as Tom Sawyer, or I would respond to Huckleberry Finn. I didn't respond to Becky Thatcher or Indian Joe. I sort of passed on those two characters. If you really look at the story, Huckleberry Finn was the one with the fire red hair and freckles. Tom had a little more of a sandy blonde hair in that category. And one of the neat things, and again, back to Eddie, is they did a special. If you go to the next slide. Got ahead of myself here.
Yeah, I was about to say I didn't hear the final straw of you pulling on Walt's leg until he finally cracked.
Yeah. So in turn, I was in the Penny Arcade playing the baseball machine in the Penny Arcade, and Dick Nunes came up and tapped me on the shoulder. I don't know if that name means anything to you, but at that time frame, Dick was the supervisor of Frontierland.
Yeah.
And when Dick retired, he was the chairman of Disney Resorts worldwide. So Dick tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Come with me, Tom." And when Dick says, "Come with me," you don't argue with Dick. You went over. Walt and Morgan Evans was coming back off the island, and we met him there at the raft landing, and Walt said, "Tom, do you still want to be Tom Sawyer?" And I told him, "Absolutely, Mr. Disney, I want to be Tom Sawyer." And Walt was very easy to talk to. He had a lot of child actors, and you got to understand now. I'm 12 years old. Okay, talking to a 55-year-old celebrity. So. Yeah. But in turn, he had it down wired. He says you need to get a work permit and a social security card, and once you do that, I'll put you to work as Tom Sawyer.
Wow.
So in turn, it was real easy. The social security card just went to the office in Santa Ana, filled out the form, and I got the card. Okay, the work permit was a little bit more of a challenge. I had to get a form from school. Had to take it to an employment office. They had to fill it out. Then I had to take it back to school. Then they would, in turn, review everything, and then they would issue a work permit. And so I had my form, and I went to the employment office. And the employment office was a house on West Street that they didn't tear down, that they kept it. And in there was the manager of employment, Chuck Whalen. And told the lady behind the desk my story, and so she went in and relayed it to Chuck and said that Dick Nunes knows about it. And so this side of the story I hear from Dick is that Chuck called Dick and said, "Hey, I got this kid over here that says he was hired to be Tom Sawyer. And, Dick, we don't hire kids." And Dick said he took a little bit of a deep breath and said, "Well, Chuck, Walt did hire him, so let your conscience be your guide." And at that point, all my paperwork got filled out, and I ended up getting my work permit. And if you look at this is my mother saved a whole lot of stuff. So thank God for mothers.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, she saved this. This is my original hire status. And when I retired in 2003, if you look at my current rate on this status was 75 cents an hour.
Wow.
Okay, and I was called a guest aide. And when I retired in 2003, I wasn't making much more than that per hour. And down at the bottom, you can see some of the restrictions. I couldn't work after 10 o'clock at night on a school night or before 6 o'clock in the morning. And there was a few other things. And anytime minimum wage went up, I got a raise. So that was sort of neat. If you look at the higher date, it's June 18th, 1956.
Yeah.
Okay, so in turn, Tom Sawyer's Island was opened on June 16th, 1956. So
Wow.
any publicity shots that you see on the island, that's not me. That's they brought out the kids that won the Tom Sawyer and Becky Thatcher a contest in Hannibal, Missouri, to be part of the opening ceremonies for the island. Okay, so in turn, what did Tom Sawyer do? As I think I said earlier, I posed for a lot of pictures. It took and maintained the fishing poles. I think if we go to the next slide is Parade magazine. And if you notice in the publicity shots, I won't bring it, but I don't wear any shoes. Okay. I went barefoot. Yeah, there's a lot of things that we did back there that you couldn't do in today's world. But,
yeah, I bet.
But in turn, one of the things I remember Walt telling me that he could put a mannequin, or was it a dummy? One or the other over on the island that wouldn't be leaving every 15 minutes for a hot dog and a Coke. This is the result of all those hot dogs. I've always had a weight problem all my life, and this is one of those time frames. I got a little bit of a razzing on this one from my uh, fellow students, and I was in junior high when this was put out. So
Wow.
in turn. Walt used to come over to the island quite a bit. Actually, he used to go into the park quite a bit early in the morning, and he'd walk around and he'd talk to the landscape people, and he'd talk to the custodial people, and he'd talk to the security people. He'd talk to anybody that would talk to him. And he was always asking questions and looking at that land. Say he used to come over to the island, and we'd walk the island, and he would tell me. And Walt was the art director on Tom Sawyer's Island. I think it was his dream of what him and Roy would have liked to have had back in their childhood growing up in Marceline, Missouri. But one of the things that Walt used to say is, I put the paths here for the adults. The kids can go wherever they want to go. We'll use landscaping, and just use a lot of holly bushes, and they did fence off some areas you couldn't get back behind Fort Wilderness and that. But as we were walking the park, he basically said, I'm gonna close the island down, and we're gonna do a major rehab of the island. And Tom, what do you think the island needs? And I said, well, I think it needs an escape tunnel from Fort Wilderness, and I think it needs a treehouse. Yeah. And so in turn, when it came back up from its rehab, it had let's go to the next slide. It had a treehouse and the escape tunnel from Fort Wilderness. This shot here is it's Walt and I sitting on a railing on a raft, waiting to go across the island. This picture is actually out of Saturday Evening Post, June 28, 1958, I believe is the in that. Saturday Evening Post. And I remember Walt looking over at me, and he says, Tom, just look at me and smile. I do this all the time. It sort of put me at ease. And in turn, I think if we go to the next slide, is a follow up to the same picture. And if you notice, I don't have any shoes on again.
Got your cane poles.
This one took a little while to take. The photographer wanted the Mark Twain in the background,
Yeah.
and the cycle time on the Mark Twain was about 20 minutes. So he'd set up a shot, then you'd have to wait for the boat to come around, and he didn't like that shot, so we'd have to wait for the boat to come around. And so Walt and I talked a whole lot about fishing on the island, and in turn, that's when he had talked about the rehab on the island, and what did it need, and so one of the only times that I can remember in my career that I was an art director was on the rehab for Tom Sawyer's Island, and when it came back up, it had an escape tunnel, it had a treehouse, it had teeter-totter rock, merry-go-round rock, and castle rock. I won't take credit for the rocks, but I will take credit for the treehouse. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, that's the treehouse.
Wow.
It's sort of neat. What was originally there was called Lookout Point, and you had a deck area, and there were 3 waterfalls that came out from underneath the deck area and cascaded down to the rivers of America.
Wow.
Okay, so in turn, what happens? Tom Sawyer sort of grows up. That last year, when I was 17, I was too young to be a ride operator, and I was almost too old to be Tom Sawyer.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did most of the time was I would help out on the rides and attractions when things got busy. Now I used to come in early in the mornings, and the guys taught me how to drive a raft. Okay, so I knew all about driving rafts and how to start them and drive them and that type of thing. So the guys were really good about that. Yeah. So when I turned 18, I was old enough to be a ride operator at Disneyland. In turn, I had work tickets and helped load the raft, unload the rafts, and what I do is I'd go over and get all the fishing poles set up on the docks and get the worms out. I retired as the manager of distribution services at Walt Disney World, which heavily involved in inventory. And I didn't realize back then I had a supervisor that wanted me to do inventory control on the worms. He didn't think we were getting our fair share of worms, and there were supposed to be 350 worms in a flat, and the flat was a crate, and they came packed in rabbit manure was the medium, and they came packed in.
Oh, man.
So I did the inventory of 3 flats of worms, and I'll let you know that we're getting more than our fair share of worms per flat. And we'd take them out of that, and then I had potting soil that we used to put in the containers on the dock that were nailed to the railings that had worms on them, and I would put X number of worms in that. And so one of the jobs was to bait the hooks for the people that wanted to. When we first started, it was a catch and clean program. So there was an area set up where I would clean the fish as the guests wanted it, and
wow.
in a plastic bag. That didn't last very long.
So what kind of fish are we talking about?
Maybe a month if it was that long, because old dead fish started showing up in places that you didn't want old dead fish to show up.
Wow.
Uh,
I
so we
imagine.
so we immediately deburbed all the hooks and went from a catch and clean program to a catch and release program. Okay, so in turn, no, I worked all through junior high school and high school, so almost 5 years. In June of '61, I turned 18. Uh, June is a very active month for me. I was hired in June. I retired in June. I was born in June. Father's Day's in June. Um, I got married in June. So June has always been a very active month for me. So
Is for me. I was married in June. What is it? What is your anniversary?
22nd.
Ours is June 6th, and my daughter was born June 1st. So very active month at our household too for June.
Yeah, such a deal. So I think once I turned 18 and then getting ready to get there, they held a contest to replace me. And the contest was advertised in the Anaheim Bulletin. And a kid by the name of Keith Murdoch won the contest, and he portrayed Tom Sawyer for 3 years after I had retired from that position. And after Keith wrapped up, they didn't have Tom Sawyer anymore, and they didn't stock the rivers of America with fish anymore. So back at this time frame, Disneyland was closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, with the exception of summer and holidays, Christmas holidays and Easter. Okay, so and Tom Sawyer's Island was only open on the weekends. So it's a it's a Sunday afternoon, the end of summer, and the same supervisor that asked me to do the inventory on the worms handed me a script or spiel for the Jungle Cruise, and he said, "Tom, go home and memorize this on Wednesday morning and report to the Jungle Cruise." I think it would go next slide. Uh,
Wow.
there were two attractions that were just heavily male-oriented attractions, and that was the Jungle Cruise and Submarines. Okay, so I showed up on a Wednesday morning. I don't remember. I think Lee David was my trainer. We made a couple trips with him, and then he handed me the mic, and I made the next trip, and he gave me a thumbs up. And after the third trip, I was a official jungle bunny cruise skipper.
Wow.
And did that, and in turn, during the week, I would work on the Jungle Cruise or on 20K, and on the weekends I'd work on the rafts. One thing about working on the rafts is nobody had to train me. I pretty much knew that going into it, so I was a what they call a relief foreman in the summertime. So the day foreman would be off on 2 days out of the week, and the night foreman would be off 2 days of the week. And so I would work actually 4 nights, because the night foreman would cover the day foreman's day off, and he'd have 2 days off, and I'd cover. So 4 days a week I was a foreman. One day I was a ride operator. I sort of put this in the Jungle Cruise. The next one's going to be the submarine attraction. And if you look in next slide, and if you look in the middle of the bay, there are mermaids.
Wow, the live mermaids.
There were things that we did back in that time frame. So there was mermaids out there, and every once in a while you get a a drunken sailor that want to go swim over and join the mermaid. But I think mid '60s was the last of the mermaids. Next slide, if you would.
I remember hearing about them too, having trouble with the mermaids back in that time too, getting like sunburn. Their shifts would be so long, they'd be just out in the direct sun, out in that water, and they had issues with actually getting sunburned out there too. So it's really, really interesting.
The other problem was the chlorine.
Oh yeah.
It was turning their hair green. So.
Oh wow. Wow. Yeah, because it's probably not, it probably was over chlorinated, not really meant for people to swim in at that point.
That was back at that time frame. I put this slide in for a couple reasons. Number one is the size of the castle at Disneyland. Number two is if you look at the horizon, okay, the only thing you can really see out there, if you really eyeball it, is some high power lines.
Yeah.
Okay? If you look at that same horizon today, it's hotel on top of hotel on top of hotel. And if we go to the next slide, it's the same thing in Tomorrowland. And that attractions come and go. Skyways coming on. Viewliner was pre-monorail. In the body of water on the left-hand side of the slide used to be the Phantom boats, and then back behind that was the Autopia. And if you look underneath that yellow Skyway bucket, it says the space bar. I know that's what it says because it was a space bar.
Yeah.
And then if you see the red and white checkered tower, that's the Astrojets. And then right behind that would be the Harbor Gate.
Okay. Got it. Yep.
And you could just see half of the TWA rocket and the moon building. But I put this slide in again for the same thing, is look at the horizon. And today that would be hotel on top of hotel with
absolutely
lines and everything else. So that's sort of one of the things that inspired Walt to look at building Walt Disney World. Okay, so there were two attractions that I worked every ride and attraction at Disneyland with the exception of, and I think this next slide is the steam. Oh,
these guys.
Oh, flying saucers. I love working the flying saucers. There was just some attractions that you really, really enjoy working. The rafts for me was one of those. Keelboats or another one because you actually had to drive those. They weren't on tracks, and the flying saucers was in Tomorrowland between the moon ride and the show building on the right hand side. Where it is where Space Mountain is today. Okay, and if you look at it, it's a big pie. Okay, and there are 4 sections to the attraction. So the people that are out on the table right now are flying. Okay, and the same thing is happening behind us on the other half of the pie. And this boom that you see sweeps out and would sweep these flying saucers back into a holding area. And then you can see all the people that are getting ready to ride over on the right hand side of the screen. Okay,
wow.
So, and in turn would walk up and down this boom with the stick and push the saucers back on the holding area. Now the problem with the saucers were they were very, very weight critical. If you're over 220, you weren't going anywhere. You'd just sit there. If you're under 100 pounds, the saucer would bounce up and down.
I heard the stories of like just sitting there bouncing. Yeah, that's really interesting.
So if you look at, there's 2 kids in one saucer. We used to do that all the time to get enough weight in the saucer to hold it down. The problem with this attraction is that it was broke down more than it was up and operating. And the valves on the top of the table, they're about 4 inches around, and the back pressure from the saucer would open those valves, and it would blow air up underneath the saucer, and that's what would make it fly. And, and in the morning, we go out and spray the table with silicone. So in the morning, the saucers would really move. So we'd have to test them just to make sure that they were working well. The problem with is if you had a cloud come over, the back pressure from the cloud would open up all the valves and the
Wow. That's really interesting. And if I remember correctly, this was another Bob Gurr design, right? This ride vehicle, I think, was Bob Gurr.
I didn't hear the question, Cory.
That if I'm not mistaken, I think that this ride vehicle, the Flying Saucers, was another Bob Gurr design. If I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah, Bob Gurr. You're saying Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah. Bob will admit that it was down more than it was up.
Yeah, he had some good ones, but this one might not have been the best of all of them.
It had big blowers in the back of the traction that would supply the air to it. Now in the rain, it was really great. I remember one Cub Scout day that we opened up early bird for Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts, and I was walking by, and there's on the right hand side on the show building, there's a restroom, men and women's restroom in their area, and I'm going on a break, and it's been drizzling, okay, and all of a sudden I walk by the men's room, and the water is just running out of the men's room. So I open the door and look, and here's all these Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts inside wringing their clothes out, okay, so they can go back and ride the saucers again because they were just getting drenched.
Wow.
With the saucers. But that was, I thought a toilet was overflowing. It was just a bunch of Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts wringing out their clothes.
That's amazing.
Okay, so I think this is where we go to the steam train. Yep. Okay, the steam train and monorail were two attractions that I didn't work back in the early days. And the reason being is they were operated by Retlaw. And Retlaw was a company that was owned by the Walt Disney family. Okay. And in turn, they sort of control who was going to work the attraction, and they wanted a minimum amount of costumes and to hold their overhead down and all sorts of things. So in order to work on the monorail, the next slide is a monorail, and you had to be 6 foot tall. Well, I was never going to be 6 foot tall. Okay, so I wasn't going to be able to work on the monorail, and then in turn, you went from the monorail to the steam trains, and the people were interchangeable back and forth. Mm-hmm. So right at this same time, and this is in the mid '60s. I got an invite from my other Uncle Sam, that asked me to participate in a little war that we had going on in Vietnam, and I sort of looked at that and said, okay, if I'm going to go to war, I want to be the best trained. In my mind, the best trained was to be a Marine. And John Wayne was one of my heroes. So
there you go.
So in turn, I went down and enlisted in the Marine Corps. And back that time frame, we had an obligation. You had a 6-year obligation, 2 years active duty, and 2 years active reserve, and 2 years inactive reserve to fulfill your obligation. Now, the employer also had an obligation to hold your job for you when you ended up going into the service. So in turn, I went down and talked with a recruiter, and I ended up enlisting for a 3-year hitch. And the reason I took a 3-year hitch is it was 3 years active duty and it was 3 years of inactive reserve. And the reason being is the schedulers didn't like active reserve people because they had to leave for weekends to go play weekend warriors and were gone for 2 weeks in the summertime and that type of thing. So I didn't want any of that active reserve thing. Well, the thing I didn't realize is that when I enlisted for the 3 year hitch, that it made me eligible for all the schooling that somebody would have got on a 4 year hitch. So that was sort of neat. And somehow I ended up doing extremely well in the electronics portion of the test, and so I ended up being selected to be an aviation radio repairman. And so they ended up sending me to school in San Diego. Uh, I joined the Marine Corps to see the world. I never got more than 82 miles from home. So somebody up there was looking out for me. That line. But in turn, I ended up I had orders to Da Nang, and we were coming. Couple of my buddies were in the car, and I was taking all my stuff to my mother's to store because we were gonna be shipped out in 2 weeks. And it was St. Patrick's Day, 66, and a drunk hit me head on, tried to kill me, put me in the hospital for 5 months, and I ended up getting mustered out of the Marine Corps on a medical discharge in 1968.
Wow.
Looking back on that, I wasn't real happy with the scenario, but in turn, like I said, somebody out there was looking out for me.
Yeah.
I was the height of the Vietnam War, and like I say, never got more than 82 miles from home
Wow.
during that entire time frame. Okay, so we get back to Disneyland. Okay, Walt has passed. Walt passed while I was in the Marine Corps, and the New York Fair, World's Fair, all happened during that time that I was in the Marine Corps. I think the last time I remember, and I think there's a slide in here on Walt signing autographs, but the last time that I saw Walt was in the 62 time frame, maybe 63, in Frontierland. He was being totally inundated with people wanting autographs, and one of the things that you would do is if Walt was getting very swamped, you would ask him, did he want to go backstage, and he would either say yes or he'd say no. Okay, and he wasn't real comfortable with all the backstage exits and that kind of thing. So we were in Frontierland, and I asked him, and he said yes, he'd like to go backstage. And so we sort of meandered over to the gate between the Oaks Tavern and the malt shop, and got backstage. And at that time frame, I sort of reintroduced myself to Walt and said, I don't know if you remember me or not, but you hired me to be Tom Sawyer. And he says, oh yeah, you used to have to bring your report card in all the time, and I'd review that or have Dick review it along that time. So how you doing? And I told him a little bit, how much I enjoyed working the rides and attractions. And that was the last real contact I had with Walt. And right after that, I went into the Marine Corps, and then in 65, 66, Walt passed. Okay, so next slide, I think is the, okay, so when I got back to Disneyland, I remember they sort of had to hold your job.
Yeah.
So I got back, and I had dreams of grandeur of being an electronical engineer, and went to Cal State Fullerton and on the GI Bill, and spent about a year and a half and realized that I wasn't going to be a fantastic electronical engineer. Yeah, what I really wanted to be is in rides and attractions management for the Walt Disney Company. At that time, it was Walt Disney Productions. So in turn, I ended up getting interviewed. Bob Matheson interviewed me at that time, and I ended up getting a job offer to go to Florida. If we go to the next slide. This is what the Contemporary Hotel looked like when we arrived.
Wow.
If you go back, the whole selling point on the Contemporary Hotel was modular construction.
Mm-hmm.
So all the rooms for the hotel were built in a building on property by U.S. Steel. We were partners with U.S. Steel. And in turn, this is the elevator shafts, okay, and then the start of the skeleton for the Contemporary. I think the next slide shows us sliding. Yeah, this is sliding a room into the structure.
That's
And
unbelievable.
what you had in between the two rooms, you had a pipe chase. Okay, so they would slide the room, and the room was totally furnished when it came out of
Wow.
being constructed. So all the wallpaper and furniture and carpets and everything were already in the room when it was going in, and the sales pitch back at that time frame, it wasn't going to happen, but the sales pitch was, well, when it comes time for rehab, we'll just go pull the room out and we'll put it back in like you do in a drawers and a chest of drawers. But like I say, it was a good story. Now, U.S. Steel built the rooms for the Contemporary Hotel, for the Polynesian Hotel, for the Golf Resort Hotel, and a hotel that was called the Court of Flags down on 528 and I-4.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think one of the best deals that Roy Disney ever did was buy U.S. Steel out. They weren't going to be good partners. I'll talk a little bit about when I was working with the monorail. Part of my job was to ensure that the monorail stations were up and getting ready for opening, and trying to get into the Contemporary Hotel or the Polynesian Hotel past U.S. Steel security was an absolute pain in the posterior. Sometimes it would take me 2 to 3 hours to get clearance to go
Wow.
on my station. So I sort of said, yeah, we'll go to the next slide if you would. As you found out that I finally got to work the monorail.
Wow.
In turn, that we were going to open a monorail at Walt Disney World, and Pete Grimmings was going to be the ops manager of transportation, and Pete wanted me to manage the monorail operation. So guess who got to work the monorail at Disneyland? And I trained with Retlaw for a year there, and they actually altered a costume for me to wear. And when I was in the locker room putting it on, I'm sort of looking, and this was back when it was the Captain America costume. It was sort of a royal blue with red, white, and blue trim on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it looked like a little red, white, and blue barrel with a hat. But in turn, I was able to operate and train on the monorail system. And so that was my job when I relocated to Walt Disney World. Now,
Wow.
if this is the train coming in to the ticket and transportation center station, okay, that beam's 30 inches wide. And so I finally got tired of all the shenanigans with U.S. Steel. So I would walk the beam.
Wow.
And I'd walk up and check my stations. The walk to the poly was real short.
Yeah.
Okay. I could walk right over and be in. It was less than a city block. The walk up to the Contemporary was a little bit of a challenge, and no, you didn't do it when you saw storm clouds on the horizon, or you heard lightning or thunder. But it would just take me a little time to walk up there, check
Oh
the
yeah.
and
It's an incline up there.
okay, so we went through that and all that. Oh my God, it's hard to believe it's going to be 50 years.
It is.
Coming up on the horizon that we opened a world up. Okay, so in turn got the monorail up and operating. If you look at the end of the building there, the Contemporary Hotel, even after we opened in October, uh, they had still pouring concrete on each end of the building for the stairways and emergency exits. And and the, the radios were so heavily utilized, and we were on the same frequency as the kennel, as the as the 20K submarines in the
Oh,
parking lot and the honor. We were all together on the same radio channels. So in turn, what I did is I put monorail operators on each end of the building with a red flag and green flag uh, uh, on top of ladders. And as the concrete pour would start, they would wave a red flag and the train would hold until they got a green flag, and then they could drive in to
wow.
Contemporary, because trying to talk to them on the radio was just a absolutely pain trying to get a hold of them. So it was the red flag, green flag. Reminds me back to watching who was it on TV.
That's
Uh,
very cool.
yeah, but it was one of those. So got the monorail up and operating. When we opened, it was supposed to have 6 trains. Well, only 4 were available. The trains at Disneyland only operated in one direction. The monorails here at Walt Disney World would operate in either direction. There's about 106 switches that make the train go, okay, and over 300 that would stop the train. And occasionally we would have a problem of the coordination between the cab number 1 and cab number 5. The Mark IVs had five cars. Mark said they had 6 cars, but in turn, so sometimes you would have to drive the train all day in reverse. So that was one of those. And then one of the other problems that we had is the guests always wanted to ride through the Contemporary Hotel. So we learned real quick in the morning we'd run in through the Contemporary Hotel, and around 4 o'clock in the afternoon we'd switch the trains and we'd run back to the parking lot through the Contemporary Hotel. So that way the people would exit, and we did have an express train and a local train. The local train stopped at the Polynesian and the Contemporary,
That's awesome.
Magic Kingdom and Ticket and Transportation Center. Okay, so we got through opening. That was a real thrill. Opening day was interesting. Uh, the fog came in early that morning, and I remember I was up at the Ticket and Transportation Center station, and you couldn't see past the gates because of the fog. Okay,
Mm.
and you had all these people, trying to get in. Well, we opened, and about a half hour after we opened, then the fog lifted, and you could see that there was nobody at the gates. And thank God, it took us a little while to get things up and operating, and and working efficiently. That Thanksgiving is when we backed up traffic all the way to Orlando on I-4, and realized that Orlando stopped at 33rd Street, which is if you're driving I-4 now, that's right where John Young Parkway crosses
Hmm.
I-4, and south of that was was the International Drive. International Drive was the Hilton Inn South and a gas station. That was it. That was International Drive back at that time frame. Okay, so we got everything up and going, and the decision was to build. Go to the next slide, if you would, to build Tom Sawyer's Island, and I had a little bit of a background in that area, so
Yeah.
I moved from the monorail transportation system to Frontierland Liberty Square for the construction of Tom Sawyer's Island and the Richard F. Irvine. Uh,
Wow.
and both those attractions opened in 73, I believe it was what it was. If you go to the next slide. And we did the same thing here that they did in California for the opening of Tom Sawyer's Island. And we invited the winners of the Tom Sawyer and Becky Thatcher contest to be part of the opening ceremonies of the island. And I want to say it was in May 20th of 1973 is when we opened the island. So
Wow.
right after that, I sort of got tagged as a nuts and bolts guy, and so I would go from area to area on projects. So my next move was, and we'll go to the next slide, is to Tomorrowland. When we opened Tomorrowland, there wasn't a whole lot in Tomorrowland. I had the Circle Vision and Mission to Mars and the Skyway Station and the Grand Prix, but there wasn't a whole lot in Tomorrowland. So the decision was to build Starjets, okay, Wedway People Mover, Carousel of Progress, and Space Mountain. And all that was slotted to open in January of 1975. Uh, in turn, if you go to the next slide, is the construction of Space Mountain,
Wow.
and what you're looking at is it's when all that scaffolding comes down, it's a four-legged stool.
Hmm.
Okay, and if you look around, there are rings of uprights and crossbars, and there's 73 of those. And what we did is attach roof panels. Uh, the original roof panels were to be built in Tampa and trucked over. The problem being is the first one fell off the truck
Oh no.
in Tampa. We had to send a whole crew over there with dump trucks and jackhammers, and
Wow.
the decision was to cast the roof panels on property, and it was the same place that they built to cast the monorail beams. The monorail beams for the original opening were cast in Tacoma, Washington, and trucked here by rail and offloaded in Taft. Uh,
Wow.
Okay, so I think next slide will show the roof panels.
Oh,
Okay,
that's
it'll
that's pretty
show
amazing.
scaffolding down. Okay, the sections around, and if you look about 2 o'clock on the clock, there's an opening where we can get cranes in and out of of the construction site, and
Wow.
it started in turn loading in the track sections and hanging the roof panels. Next slide will show the roof panels. Okay, and like I said, there's 73 of those panels that went up in enclosed uh, Space Mountain. I tell you, riding Space Mountain, uh, I'm not sure which is the scariest, in total darkness or with the work lights on. In total darkness, it's a whole different ride and experience.
It is.
Work lights on, yeah, you could see all the scaffolding and all the walkways, and it is really scary
Yeah.
riding on that. There was a time when we were doing testing for Big Thunder wheels, and they were a lot faster than the wheels that were on the Space Mountain train, and there were two cars, so it would go through sensors and count two fins. Okay, well, it was going so fast that it would only count one fin. That's how fast
Wow.
those new wheels were. That was sort of a fun time. So got Space Mountain and Tomorrowland open and operating in '75, and so I had the opportunity to go to Fantasyland. And if we go to the next slide, for 20,000 Leagues.
Wow.
Uh, 20,000 Leagues in turn, when it was first built and put in place, that all the art directors were totally enamored with the clarity of the water. That everybody went to Silver Springs, and they thought that was the greatest thing. So they decided not to chlorinate and filter the water for 20,000 leagues. They would pump it out of the aquifer into 20,000 leagues, and in turn would be the makeup water for the moat, for the Jungle Cruise, for the Rivers of America, and then down the Lightboat Channel into the Seven Seas Lagoon, and then disseminated from there out into the 55 miles of drainage canals that we
Wow.
built on the property. Okay, but the problem being is it didn't have the same volume flow of water that you were getting out of Silver Springs, and you were getting dead spots, and you get algae growth, and
Mm-hmm.
so they had to go down and scrub the mermaids and the portholes and the fish almost on a daily basis. So the decision was to shut 20K down, drain it, in turn rehab everything back to its original floral colors, and close it and chlorinate it. Uh,
Wow.
and so that decision was done. It was in 1975. So got that open and operating, and then I had the opportunity, and I was promoted to the manager of Frontierland Liberty Square. So if we go to the next slide, and there's a little project going on there called Big Thunder, and so I had the opportunity to build Big Thunder. Now, Big Thunder, Disneyland and Walt Disney World were sort of in competition on who was going to get Big Thunder first, and Disneyland got it first. So it was probably one of the most smoothest opening operations that we did. I had the opportunity to go out to California and operate and work Big Thunder out there, and in turn we were able to incorporate some real neat things when we built the system here at Walt Disney World and opened up and clicked right along. And so they got open, and I sort of get this phone call uh, from Norm Burgess, who in turn asked me if I wanted, if we'll go to the next slide, if I wanted to be involved in the Epcot project. And I'm going, okay, I get to open another park. I learned a lot on
Yeah.
opening world and on opening various attractions in it. Now I have the opportunity to take all that knowledge and put it to work. And I thought I was going to be a pavilion coordinator. If you go to the next slide. But in turn, my boss, Norm, wanted me to run a warehouse for what we call OFI, owner furnished items. So anything that we bought or manufactured for show installation, if it wasn't put directly in the show, had to go into storage. And
Mm-hmm.
in turn, I had just built a house off of 535, less than 3 miles away from the Magic Kingdom. And so now my job is in Orlando Central Park, which is now 21 miles from where. But in turn, like I said, I thought I was going to be a pavilion coordinator, but Norm wanted me to run run the warehouse here in Florida, and I had a crew of folks, and understand that all the rides and everything were built in Tahunga in California.
Yeah.
Okay? Disassembled, put on trucks, sent to Florida, and it either went directly to the site or it went into storage.
Wow.
Well, the other side of the story here is it's one of a kind items. Okay, you
Mm-hmm.
can't go to Home Depot and buy one. Okay, so in turn, we developed a item tracking system that we were able to put numbers and everything on all the associated product. If it was delivered directly to the site, I had a crew that would meet and greet and make sure the truck got delivered to the right place, and all the freight bills had got handled properly and signed off. If not, that it went to the warehouse and we in turn offloaded it. And every day was like Christmas. It
Yeah.
was neat. You get in there in the morning and you have 3, 4 trucks backed up to the doors, and you'd open the back of the truck up and understand that the truck drivers had no responsibility other than driving the truck across.
Yeah.
They were what they called sealed loads. And most of the trucks were air ride. And as they opened the back of the truck and you look and you're going, what in the heck? And then the next question is how the hell did they get that on there? Next question is how are we going to get it off? You're not.
Exactly.
So in turn, we went through that process over and over and over again. But it was neat, and got things going and put together. I think one of the slides that I have coming up next is Spaceship Earth. Uh, PICO is an acronym for Project Installation Coordination Office. And Orlando Ferrani put PICO together to build the New York World's Fair. And in turn, they've used it all the way through major attractions and openings, and has been very profitable. And what you do is you take people out of the operating side of the business. Okay, you assign them to the construction side of the business. Okay, and in turn they go through the building of whatever attraction, uh, uh, restaurant, uh, uh, ride, whatever it is, and then they are the people that train the people that are going to operate it, and they are the people that are going to manage it. So that's the whole cycle that goes with PICO.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is Spaceship Earth. If you look at Spaceship Earth, it's a big helix, okay, a big screw, like,
Mm-hmm.
and you started at the bottom and you worked your way up to the top, and then up at the top was a big projection screen. Okay, and what we had originally planned on is to deliver the sets in sequence and to install them set 1 through 40 or whatever it was. Well, the problem being, if you go to the next slide, the problem being is that construction got a little bit behind, and they needed to get the skin on Spaceship Earth. So we needed to enclose it. So the only thing we could do is we had an opening in the bottom. So we in turn installed it in reverse order. So the last set went in first and went all the way to the top, and then
Wow.
filled all the way down. The set number 1 was the last set to go in, and then they closed up the hole. Okay, and then they reinstalled that. So yeah, you have game plan A, plan B, and game plan C. Okay, so Epcot in turn got open and operating. If you go to the next slide, and we're into phase 2, and we're into 1984. And I think you're all aware of what happened in 1984. That's the storming of the Magic Kingdom and the takeover attempts, and Epcot did not make its return on investment. The stock was going south, on a daily basis, more almost like what we just experienced, but in turn got going and Roy resigned from the board, went out and found Frank Wells and Michael Eisner, and brought them on, and got back into it. And anything was overhead driven was history.
Mm-hmm.
So WED was overhead driven, and there wasn't going to be anything new on the horizon. So in turn, I got a call that basically said, "Look, the 20 people that work for you don't work for you anymore, and yeah, pack your office up, and you'll get a telephone call." And at least I knew I had a job. I didn't know what it was. And in turn, I got the opportunity to make a major career change. The first 25 years of my career was rides and attractions, working and handling with guests. Okay, in '79, I went into WED and into warehousing of OFI, and I really liked that. And so I had the opportunity in '84 to stay into warehousing support for Walt Disney World. If you go next slide. Okay, so I was in turn moved into distribution services. I was the superintendent of general supplies, long-term storage, and project warehousing. And that clicked along fairly well. And Christmas of '84, the manager of distribution went on vacation. And I don't know if it was an alien abduction or what it was. So in turn, we 6 of us interviewed for the job, and I ended up getting the job as the manager of distribution services for Walt Disney World. By
Wow.
this time, Michael and Frank were on board. They had brought the Bass brothers on as a white knight, and things started to turn around, and the property just started growing. Just fantastic growth on property. You go to the next slide, it gives you a little idea of everything that was going on during that time frame. And on top of that, we were building warehouses because we had moved into about 18 different warehouses in the Orange and Osceola County area. And during this whole green mail thing and that type of thing, we had bought Arvida, and Arvida brought some very real estate oriented people into the company, and in turn, we needed to build a new warehouse, and they were able to help us support that whole decision. So we built almost 1 million square feet of
Wow.
space. And yeah, in turn, we also needed a real-time inventory system supported by barcoding, and we were able to do that. Now, we also needed some automation, but we couldn't sell that one. Okay, so we in turn built the warehouses, moved everything in, got caught up, and got everything working on a new inventory system, and everybody was real happy with it. So they decided that we were going to use that same system for the next major project that was on the horizon. So guess who gets to go to a new project on the horizon? I had trained the director of distribution services for Euro Disney, aka Disneyland Paris. Okay, and John Louis was clicking along, and I had made a couple trips over to visit his operation, answer any questions he had, and to answer any questions my boss had at that time frame, and everything was clicking along. And on January, the first Friday in January after the first, I get a call from Howard Rowland, who was my boss at the time, and he says, "Tom, I want to have lunch with you and Paul Millay on Sunday." And I said, "Well, you're in Paris." He says, "Yeah, you're going to be there too." Uh, in turn, so on Friday, I find out I'm going to Paris. So I pack everything up, and he says the travel company's working on getting your tickets and everything ready. So we'll see you Sunday morning for breakfast.
Wow.
January, he ended up. Oh God, and it was cold. It ended up going to Europe. Me with Paul and Howard, and pretty much did the same thing for Disneyland Paris as I did for Epcot, and work with the WED people and get everything going, and then in turn work with John Louis on general supplies, merchandise, and in the food operation. Okay, so we get that all open and going, and I'm sort of looking down the horizon, and we're getting ready to go through another major restructure. And I sit down. I had hired a financial advisor, Mike Wicks, many years earlier, and I sort of looked at him. I said, Mike, got so many of my mentors have passed without experience the first day of retirement, and I don't want that to happen to me. Can I afford to retire? And he said, well, let me look at the numbers. And so we went through all the numbers. If you go to the next slide, all the numbers, they seem to pan out. And I told him, I said, you got one more job, and that was to sell Mrs. Nabbe. So we sat down with Janice and went through everything, and so made the decision that I would retire the last Saturday of June 27th. And if you ever look at a company, and Disney is a prime example of it, is that if you retire on the last day of the month, you get your retirement check on the first day of the next month.
Smart move.
So you want to plan that along line. So I had the opportunity to retire. My boss at that time frame, Greg Gross, he says, Tom, what would you really like to have as a retirement gift? And I said, what I'd really like to have is a window on Main Street. And Greg said, well, let me work on that. So he called back and said, Tom, I got you a window on Main Street at World. I couldn't get you on Main Street at Disneyland, but you do get Disneyland credit. Okay.
Wow.
If you go to the next slide, that's my window on Main Street.
That's absolutely amazing.
On the right-hand side, and if you look at this, it says Tom Nabbe, proprietor, and it says Anaheim, California, Lake Buena Vista, Florida.
Wow.
So I do get a little credit for Disneyland. So I've got goosebumps right now.
But I do too. It's absolutely amazing.
You sort of look at this and go, God, what could be any better than a window on Main Street at Walt Disney World? Okay. Now the one thing that we do every 5 years, I've always want to be at Disneyland on July 17th. And I've been able to do that ever since we relocated to Florida. And it's on my horizon for the 65th, which is coming up on this July 17th. Hopefully that will be back and operating. We'll see along that line. So we're out there for the 50th anniversary, and we're at a function held by the Alumni Club, and guy by the name of Jim Cora. I don't know if you know Jim or not, but Jim retired with the company, but he was the executive vice president of international, worked on Tokyo, worked on Paris also. He was over. He says, Tom, I'll see you in September. And Jim's the type of guy that if he has that line out there, and if you hook it, he'll reel you in. And so I wasn't going to let him hook me and reel me in, but in turn, I thanked him very much, and when we got back to the hotel room, my sister was house sitting for us, and I called my sister and said, "Hey, is there a letter there for the studio?" And she says, "Yes." And I said, "Yeah, how about reading it to me?" And sure enough, that I'm going to be inducted as a Disney legend.
Wow.
I tell you, being a living legend is really nice. Alternative sucks a little bit. Okay. So, in turn, we got to back up just a little bit. This is the window on Main Street. The boss gave me a replica
That's
of,
so cool.
of the window. Had the opportunity that the mayor of Main Street and the current ambassador made that presentation. I know the guests walking down Main Street had no idea what was going on. Okay. And a lot of the people I work with was doing that. And that was in July of 2003. The next one will be my Disney the award that the people I work with gave me, and this is a one of a kind. Uh, there's only one that comes close to this, and they gave it to Hank Danes on
Wow.
his retirement. I didn't do 50, okay, but it does say 47 years. The way I counted is 48, but they don't give me credit for the first year of being Tom Sawyer because I
Ah,
worked there lessing. But in turn, I can go on the payroll to 56. But in turn, the guys gave me this award, and I cherish that very much. That's what they call the Fab Five:
it's
Mickey,
beautiful.
Donald, and Goofy, and Pluto. Uh, neat, neat. It's heavy.
Very, very cool. It looks heavy. It looks heavy. It looks big and heavy. Is it as heavy as the Legends trophy?
Yeah, it's probably 25 pounds. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, it's all mahogany.
Wow.
Thank
It's beautiful.
Next slide. Okay, on the legends thing. Well, somewhere I missed the family slide. Okay, it may pop up.
Oh,
Uh,
do you mean the family with your window?
yes.
Yeah, I had that up here a second ago. This
Oh,
one. Yep.
I'm sorry. jumping jumping through there. This is my Disney family, and I tell you, you can't last 47 years working for Disney without the support of your family along that line, and they supported me all the way. Janice, I met at Disneyland, and she was working at Oaks Tavern, and we started dating when I was in the Marine Corps. Uh, I was born in Santa Barbara. Janice was born in Port Arthur, Texas, same place Janis Joplin was born, and my son was born in Winter Park, Florida. So we sort of covered the entire continent, and in turn, we're all Disney. My son worked rides and attractions. He was a Jungle Bunny and worked Splash and Big Thunder. And in turn, he was working in purchasing and inventory for Vista United Telephone when they got bought out by, can't remember who bought them. Well, he ended up getting a buyout, and so he left, and he has stayed in the warehouse side of the business. He works for DHL and runs a e-commerce warehouse up in
Very cool.
Union City in Georgia. Okay. Okay. So in turn, end up getting the notification of the Disney Legend ceremony. About half of us, and another is being at the right place at the right time. Okay, so all tied in with the Disneyland's 50th anniversary. So about half the people that were involved in getting Legends inductee was part of the Disneyland opening crew folks. So So we all fell pretty much in that category. They had the ceremony. If we go to the next slide, then I love that statue.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, that is really nice. I found this online, and I'm going, I got to put that in my presentation. So,
Yeah.
if we go to the next one, I think it's a Roy. Oh, it's the like I said, we go out every 5 years. So the left-hand side of the slide is my acceptance, and it was in the Lincoln Theater, Opera House on Main Street at Disneyland, and had the opportunity to put palm prints and a signature, and then they cast that in bronze. So the right-hand side of the slide is 5 years later. Okay, and I borrowed the Legends Award from the archives, and so I'm at the studio in the Legends Park at the studio in front of my plaque.
That's amazing. Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, seeing your name on the window on Main Street had to be, surreal. But then going there and seeing your hands, cast on the wall like that with all those other names, it just had to be unbelievable.
Oh yeah, and like I say, being a living legend is a real award.
Yeah,
But it's very challenging because you have to live up to that expectations
yeah.
along the line. So
That's incredible.
yeah, and where are we? I think the next one just shows
Showing
the
at the studios there, yeah.
yeah, and if you look, that's the original statue. Okay, and that
All
puppy's
right there.
probably about 15, 20 feet high along the line, and then all the awards along the wall.
That's
Uh,
so cool. It's on my bucket list to make it out there and actually get on the studio property and be able to go check that out one day.
I didn't hear the.
Oh, I said it's on my bucket list to be able to get out there someday and actually check out this plaza, in person. I've literally stood right outside the gates there, kind of just wandering around the whole Burbank Glendale area, but they wouldn't let me inside to go walk around the plaza.
If you make it, try to make it so you can eat in the commissary. I always thought that was on the really neat experience of being able to eat in the commissary. I think the next one is just the view from the other direction. The whole Legends thing was Roy Disney's bag. He was really involved. Bob Iger is carried forward with that, but Roy was really involved. They had the opportunity at lunch at the Legends ceremony to talk with Roy a little bit. We were both sailors. The difference being is I sailed the Hobie 16 and he sailed a 160-foot sloop type thing. So little difference on the side of boat, but sailing is like riding a bicycle.
Very
Okay.
cool.
When I got the Legends Award, Peter Jennings had passed away, and Bob Iger went to Peter Jennings' funeral. So I think you mentioned earlier about a bucket list. Well, I put on my bucket list a photo op with Bob Iger. It took me 16 years. Yeah, but I made it. In turn, it was at a Legends, and I get invited every other year to the Legends ceremony and luncheon. And Bob was there, and I asked him if he'd do a photo op, and he was very cordial and
Wow.
did that. So that was my bucket list, was getting a photo op with Bob Iger. So and in turn, in this same time frame, is my significant other was my son. Janice had something going, and she wasn't able to go. I think if we go to the next slide, it's and this one boils down to what Walt's whole feeling was is it takes people. it takes people that are intrinsically motivated in order to make the thing come to life and enjoyable. And I think that's one of the things that I really like and enjoy, that I have the opportunity periodically to share my heritage with new employees, with Disney fans, uh, with people that want to fill an hour or two of blog time on their TV. But in turn, I challenge anybody out there, if they have the opportunity to share their history and story. Let's just go next slide. And if you're ever working pest control, don't. It all started with a mouse. And thank Lily for making it Mickey and not Mortimer. Next slide. Okay, so it's one of those, when I was saying that my son was my significant other, one of the things on his bucket list was to have dinner at Club 33. And I happened to call in a chit of somebody that I had done a whole lot of special events for and that type of thing. And she was very gorgeous and made us reservations for that. And Mark Hamill we're just finishing up dinner, and Mark Hamill came in, and he would sat a table away from us. So at the luncheon, uh, we're sitting there, and my son said, Dad, you know how much Star Wars fan I am. You think I can get a picture with Mark Hamill? And I said, sure. So I went over and I introduced myself to Mark Hamill. I said, we had dinner together separately last night. Okay, we both ate at Club 33. We're just at different tables. And my son would love to have a photo op with you. Would you be kind enough to do that? And he absolutely said yes. And he started talking about his first trip to Disneyland and that how much he enjoyed the Jungle Cruise. And so I shared with him that I was a jungle skipper, and so was my son. And he thought that was the greatest thing, sliced bread. I know a guy was tapping him on the shoulder here, wanting to do a interview with him, and he told me, he said, when I'm done talking with these people. That's the kind of
That's awesome.
folks that Mark Campbell was. So I whenever I have the opportunity, I try to get a shot with the celebrity that's around, or with the senior band, that type of thing. If we go to the next slide. Okay, now we're at your question and answer.
Yeah, I do have some questions.
Okay, now my first question usually is, have you ever thought about writing a book? Okay, we've covered that. And yes, I did. I had Bob McLean, who was my publisher, ran a blog, and I was doing a monthly input for him, and he sold his blog, and he says, Tom, how about you doing a book? And I said, well, I'm not a writer. He says, I don't care. So he sent me a recorder and says, start recording. And after 4 or 5 months of recording, then we in turn transcribed all that. And the first 4 or 5 months of the blog filled about 6 of the chapters up in the book, and then we filled it up from there. I had a gentleman that I worked with as an editor, Todd Price, that was just fantastic to work with along like that. And in turn, it's available on Amazon if you want it immediately, and if you're a Prime member, then it's free shipping. It's also available in Kindle, but if you want it signed and autographed, then you need to go to my site. Now the problem being is I only have so many books on hand. Okay, so if I get a large demand, then I'm gonna have to order, and then I'll have to wait for that order to come in. But you'll eventually get it. I ship USP second day delivery.
That's great. And I'd highly recommend everybody go pick up Tom's book. And you know, it turns a book into a piece of history and a Disney collectible to have Tom personalize it site, and go over there and purchase it, have him personalize it to you, and own something, you know, that's part of Disney history, signed by a Disney legend. You know, we've heard tonight the story of Tom's career. It's amazing. It's absolutely incredible to hear and to see that slide. You know, in Walt's own words, you know, Walt knew that it would take people like you to be able to make his vision come true and to be able to make it last this many years. I mean, you hear all the time people say, you know, what would Walt think of, you know, Walt Disney World today? And, you know, the 4 parks and the vastness of what it is, and there's 26 resorts. And I mean, it's enormous. And, you know, would he be proud of what he saw today? And, you know, I don't know Walt. You knew Walt personally. I don't know Walt, but I can tell you right now that I couldn't imagine that he could not be proud of the service that you gave to his company for so many years and what you were able to do. So just want to thank you very much, Tom, for your service with the Walt Disney Company, because it's changed. You know, I've said this before, but you help make these memories for people. I mean, you're laying the foundation of these attractions, of these parks, of these services that we enjoy today. Every time we go to the parks, every time we go on these family vacations. So thank you very much for everything that you've done for the company. We really appreciate you.
Well, super. I think we filled you almost your 2-hour conference.
Yes, we did. That was amazing. Do you have time just for a couple questions?
Sure.
All right. So some questions from the chat. This one was from Resort TV One in the chat, had asked, back when we were looking at the picture of the Disneyland monorail station that was right there by the Disneyland Hotel. It looks a little different than it does today. Did the track change at some point, or did the hotel buildings just change? Because the location of the station doesn't look the same.
No.
That's still the same.
What you're looking at is you're looking north out of the Ticket and Transportation Center to the Contemporary Hotel.
Oh, you're talking about in Disneyland. So at the Disneyland Hotel.
Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, the hotel expanded, and they moved West Street, and the station stayed pretty much where it was. They just built downtown, and it expanded out towards the parking lot.
Got it. Yeah, so that was the downtown wasn't there, so it just drove right through.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Donna in the chat says, have a question for Tom. What's your favorite attraction of all time out of any Disney park?
Well, Tom Sawyer's Island. Yeah, but in turn, the one that I've always enjoyed and loved every minute of it, and still enjoy it today, is Bear Band Jamboree.
Yes, I love it.
You know, especially the Christmas show. You know, I had concerns when they talked about adding Christmas elements, but once I saw that and how they put that together, they did an excellent job of upgrading that show for the holiday.
And I meant to ask you before, because I honestly don't know the full history behind it, but the restaurant that was on Tom Sawyer Island, it was Aunt Polly's was the name of it. It still opens every once in a while, like seasonally. Was that there from day one, or did that get added later on?
No, that was there day one. You know, their prime menu was P&J sandwiches.
Yeah. Every day, like when the parks are really busy during the holidays and stuff, they'll open it back up now, and they'll have like pulled pork on biscuits, like biscuit sandwiches. But I know they used to have fried chicken and stuff there too. But it's really interesting. Henry asked if you could describe Walt in 5 words or less, what would they be?
A futurist, uh, historian.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you sort of tie it
Yeah.
together is and it's Main Street and all the things that he saw and enjoyed as a child growing up, and then the flight to the moon was the highlight of that process in Tomorrowland at Disneyland.
James asks how you feel about the new concepts of Epcot, kind of the change that's going on right now in Epcot. And at any point now, this is kind of a two-part question here. Do you do any consulting for Disney, or do you ever get pulled into, hey, what do you think about this since you were here from the beginning?
No, I don't do any consulting. I've been retired almost 16 years now, but in turn I do quite a bit of this, and I've had the opportunity with D23 to
Mm-hmm.
be involved because they pretty much have taken over the archive historian portion of it. But no, I haven't been requested to do any consulting. Every once in a while, one of the people that I've worked with in the past call and ask some questions and that type of thing, and I'll add to that. I think one of the neat things is those that have gone on into academia and are now college professors and doing programs and go back when Disneyland was established. There was no college of hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody learned on OJT and through trials and error. But I have the opportunity. One of the kids that worked for me in Frontierland at World is a professor at the University of South Carolina, and he brings down a class, and I do the same presentation for that class along the line. I just did an interview for Jeff Barnes. His class, he had to go to a remote class and asked me if I would do a intro
Oh,
for
that's
his
cool.
class, and that's sort of neat. You sort of go back and in my opinion, the company goes through major changes every
Mm-hmm.
20 years. And you looked at the company was established in the 20s, and in the 40s it went through World War II. A lot of the things that we're seeing today occurred during that time frame. All the artists and people were drafted and out uh, uh, fighting in the war, and in the studios was trying to figure out different ways to stay afloat. And
Mm-hmm.
in the 60s, Walt passed, and I handed off that whole challenge to Roy, and I think Roy jumped in there and took care of that. And in the 80s, that's Michael Eisner and Frank Wells and the takeover, and Roy's involvement in that. And then now you come in to the point that in '05 is when Bob Iger was put in, and I've been extremely impressed with Bob Iger
Yeah.
all the way through, I think he's carried this company forward and has expanded the fan base just phenomenal down that line. I think we talked about that, and now in turn we're now in another major challenge
Mm-hmm.
change in 2020. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a whole different ball game. I keep looking to see, okay, what are going to be the new rules of engagement,
Yeah.
okay, and going to a theme park, and how are you going to maintain that 6 foot uh,
Yeah.
radius, that type of thing. So it's going to be a whole new rule book, just like the rule book was after 9/11. So looking forward to that.
I'm excited for the future. And like you said, these changes, I know a lot of people are reluctant to change, but it's important these things happen. These changes have to happen for the company to continue as it is. So I think that's a good place to stop. You've been very, very generous with your time tonight, Tom. We really appreciate it. Over 2 hours we've been going, and I really appreciate it. Once again, the chance to be able to talk to someone who has such a decorated the company that means so much to me and to everyone here in the chat. And we still have over 400 people watching right now. So thank you all for being here with us tonight and spending this night with us. But a true Disney legend. And I cannot wait until the next time I'm in the Magic Kingdom. I'm going to take a picture under your window and then I'm going to send it to you and be like, I'm here right now under your window.
Yeah, well, if you get the best shot if you're on the omnibus. So.
Oh, okay. There you go. And it's just it's incredible, and I can't say enough about it. And everyone, once again, make sure that you go over. And I know multiple people in the chat tonight, Tom, have said that they have gone and purchased your book. So you might have a bunch of books to sign now. So you might have to put it in that other order. But a lot of people say they're going buying the book. We really appreciate that. Get your piece of history, guys, and make sure to pick up that book. But once again, we thank you very, very much, Disney legend Tom Nabbe, for being here with us tonight. It's made for just an incredible night. We've learned so much, and thank you for your career. We appreciate you.
Well, super, Cory. It's great. I'm looking, and I can see PayPal focusing and popping across the bottom of my
awesome. So good.
I know we have a couple book sales.
Absolutely, that's awesome. Well, it was awesome. I had the you were talking about how you like to take the opportunity when you can and get photos with these people that you've looked up to, and it was my great pleasure back in October to be able to get a photo with you. And I really, I just remember hearing a little bit about your story at the gala, which, guys, by the way, and I don't think tickets are sold out, and the gala's still going on as of right now, right?
I don't think they, to best I know, Peter, I think, is still planning it.
Okay.
And I haven't heard anything about it being rescheduled.
Okay, so this is to raise money for the Walt Disney Hometown Museum in Marceline, and I had the opportunity to go to that gala last year, which was here at Epcot. This year, Tom is the keynote speaker, and it's going to be held in Marceline, in Walt Disney's hometown. So if you live in that area and you have an interest in going out and checking out that amazing town, check out that event, which we had just the absolute blast at last year. And this year you get to hear Tom's keynote. So go out there and do that if you can. But it was my great honor to be able to meet you and get a photo with you. And after hearing a little bit about your story, when I came up to you and started talking to you, there was just this genuine warmth, just a very genuine person that just wanted to sit there and talk about your history with the company, and I'll always remember that. It was such a great experience, and that's why I was like, man, I have to see if Tom will come on and talk with us on stream. So we appreciate you, and it's gonna do it for us here tonight, guys. So thank you again for being here in the stream. Thank you again to Tom. We could go on all night, but we gotta go. We can't just keep going. So thank you all so much for being here, and we will see you next week. Stream announcement coming. Some changes for next week from what we planned. So just be watching out for that, and we'll see you next time. Thank you again, Tom, very much.
Yeah, Cory, thank you very much. I enjoyed it. And I hope your audience enjoyed it as much as I did.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, bye-bye.